friends, it's Christy. I'm so happy to be back with you on the Lawn Fawn YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be making a card using the brand new Backyard Bird Feeder stamp set. I've stamped my images on Spectrum Noir Ultra Smooth Premium White cardstock with Lawn Fawn Jet Black ink, and I'm going to be coloring with my Copic markers to match some pattern paper from the Bitsy Blooms 6x6 pad. I was going back and forth on which blue shade to use, but I went with this more baby blue, and I'm going to tuck that under my cardstock panel so that I can match my markers to that. So I'm going to start with my birds, and I'm going to use B00, B21, and B24. There is a tiny darker blue fleck in that pattern paper scattered between the flowers, and that is what I am trying to match. I'm going to start with that B24 and lay in my shadows on each of the birds. I like to put it down the back side of their body so that the face can stay nice and light. That just helps their adorable features stand out all the more. Then I'm going to come in with my mid-tone, which is going to be the B21, and I'm going to pull that color forward on the face, the wings, and the tail, working in toward the belly. Then I'll come in with the highlight shade, which is the B00. This ended up being a little bit pale for me, so I am going to alter it just slightly, but I did blend over the edge of that B21 and kind of pulled it into the lightest areas. But that was pushing back the B21 a little bit more than I wanted, so I'm going to bring in B000, which is just a shade darker, and I'm going to go over the transition area between that B21 and the B00. Then I'm going to go over these birds with a second layer. This is something that I do quite a lot. It just increases the saturation of your coloring. It doesn't make it darker, it just makes it more deeply saturated, and it can really make your coloring stand out and be more dynamic. And I just quickly and easily do that by going right back over what I have previously colored. It's the great thing about coloring with alcohol markers. You're able to do that as many times as you would like. On this second pass, I'm going to blend out with the B000 as my highlight, and I'll leave off the B00. Then I'm going to bring in some pink shades to give these birds some rosy cheeks. I'm going to use R00, R20, and R22, putting a little oval shape near the eyes with that R22, and then I'm blending out around the edges of that with the R20, and then I'll use the R00 to just soften that into the bird's blue tones. And then I'm also going to do their bellies in this tone. I wanted them to look like eastern bluebirds, so I used the R22 down at the lowest part of the belly. For the one that doesn't have the line, I'm just going to draw it in myself, and then I'll blend out with the R20 and then use the R00 for the highlight. Eastern bluebirds have kind of like a grayish beak, so I went with N3 and N5, just a touch of that N5 first, and then blend it out with the N3. Now I'm going to move on to my branch, and I'm going to go with E53, E55, and E57. I'm placing that E57 on the underside of the branch. Since the upper side is facing the sun, it would obviously be getting the most light, and so I'm going to add that shadow, carefully drawing that in on all of the smaller branches as well, just holding that marker a little bit lower on the barrel so that I have more control, and just using the very tip of that nib to get those finer lines. Then I'll come in with my mid-tone, the E55, and I always go over the very edge of the previous shade to help that blend into the next one, just kind of pulling that color, dragging it into the mid-tone, and then the same with the highlight. I just pull the mid-tone into that highlighted area so everything looks nice and smooth. And then once I have that filled in, I'm going to come back in with my darkest shade, that E57, and just add a little bit of wood grain texture, doing some little circles and some dash lines until that's all filled in. Then I'm going to move to the leaves, and I'm going to go with YG41, YG45, and G46. I'm going to put my darkest shadow at the base of each leaf and then blend up toward the tip with the mid-tone, which is going to be the YG45. I'm saving a little bit of room on the edge of each of those leaves so that they look a little bit more transparent where the sun kind of shines through them. I'll fill that area in with the YG41. I went with these more blue toned greens just to match a little bit better with that blue pattern paper. Since the flowers on that pattern paper are white, I want to keep them white, but I do want to add just a tiny bit of dimension to them. I'm going to take the E40 and just add a little line of color to one side of each of the petals of that flower. And then I'll move on to my bird feeder. And I was going back and forth between a green and a gray. And so I decided to go to something that's a little bit in between that. It's kind of a very desaturated green that has a lot of gray tone in it. And that is BG93, BG96, and BG99. And I want this bird feeder to look rounded, so I'm going to place my darkest shade, that BG99, on the outer edges of both the top and the bottom, and I'm going to work my way toward the center with the BG96 and then the BG93. And I left a little bit of space there and decided to bring in the BG90, which is a super pale shade, but I'm just going to go over that very center where I left it white and pull that a little bit into the colors around it so that we get like almost a shine mark in the center of that bird feeder. For the seeds inside it, I wanted to go with something that was really golden toned. So I pulled out Y21, Y26, and YR24. I'm going to use that YR24 down at the bottom. I'll also color in the separate little pile of seed, and then I'll blend up with a flicking motion, kind of feathering that color upward with the Y26. And then I'll fill in the rest of that area with the Y21. I'll fill in the top edge of the pile of seeds as well. And then I'm going to switch to some darker tones. I'm going to keep the Y26 and the YR24, but I'm going to add in the YR27 and E18. I colored in the larger seeds with the YR24, imagining that it's like maybe dried corn, although I think it could be fun to color those in dark grays and make them look like sunflower seeds. And then I'm going to take all four of these shades and add in some extra dot detail. There's a few little dots already drawn there, but I wanted to add some extra ones to give it some nice texture and really give it that feel of birdseed. So I just started at the bottom with the darker colors and then kind of went into lighter colors toward the top. Then for the flower centers, I wanted to go with something that was a little bit brighter that matched with the centers of the flowers on the pattern paper, and I used Y13 and Y15 for that. I did also want to give a little bit of color to the top part of that bird feeder that is above the seeds so that it looks like it's transparent and we've got a little bit of the sky reflecting through. I did that with my B000, flicked in a little bit of color over the seeds as well so that it looks like it's behind that plastic or glass. And then I also used my colorless blender to just soften that. And then I trimmed these images out with their matching dies. For my background, I trimmed down a piece of Bristol smooth surface cardstock to about 3 inches by 4 inches, and I'm going to use the cloudy stencil to add a little bit of distress oxide ink to this background so I can create a nice sky. I'm going to use some tumbled glass And then I'm going to use just my ink blending tool from the Faded Jeans. I did not ink that up. I just used what was left on that ink blending foam to give a tiny bit of extra definition, and then blended back over that with the tumbled glass once again. Also, I am not placing my stencils straight across the Bristol today. I'm actually putting it at a little bit of an angle to create a different look, and just making sure that I choose a different cloud formation each time so that we get a really nice full sky and each of the clouds look different. So I'm going to do 4 different cloud formations on this panel. Just repeating that same process, starting with the tumbled glass, then adding a little bit of that ink blending tool from the Faded Jeans, back to the tumbled glass, and then at the very bottom, I don't want that last cloud to look too white, so I'm going to add both of those ink blending tools down there so everything looks really cohesive. I also wanted to do a little bit of dot detail on this background to give it some texture, and also to match with that pattern paper since it also has that tiny fleck in the background. So I pressed that tumbled glass onto an acrylic block, added a spritz of water, picked it up with a thin paintbrush, and then tapped it all over the background until I was happy with that. And then I'll set that aside to dry. To create a frame for that, I'm going to take the second largest stitch scalloped rectangle frame and trim that out of some Moonstone cardstock. So I'm just going to use the frame for today, but I can save that inner piece for another project. And then I'm also going to take my Bitsy Blooms pattern paper. I'll pull out the one that I used as my color palette inspiration. And I'm also going to take out this lighter blue kind of plaid pattern, diagonal plaid. And I'm going to trim both of these out with the large stitch rectangle stackables. I'm going to use the largest die in that set. And then I'm going to trim that blue piece down into a smaller strip, but that way my stitching detail will still line up. Now that my focal panel is dry, I'm going to pop that in my MISTI so I can stamp my sentiment. I'm going to use the one that says, "Have a seed-sational day." I love that pun. I think it's so cute. I did part of it up at the top and then the rest down at the bottom. I'll set that aside to dry and pop my card base in my MISTI. I'm using another piece of Moonstone cardstock that I've scored and folded to a standard A2 size card. It's 4 1/4 wide by 5 1/2 tall, and I'm going to stamp in Forget-Me-Not ink. I'm using a bird and another pile of seeds from the Backyard Bird Feeder, and the tiny sentiment is from the Backyard Bird Feeder add-on. I've cut down some really thin strips of my Scotch 3M foam tape to place behind that frame. So I'll peel off those release papers, and then I'm going to line that up over my focal panel. Make sure I have that all nice and straight and spaced evenly around the sentiment, and then I'll smooth that down into place. Then I will adhere my pattern papers to my card front. And I'm going to start with the blue floral print and cover my entire card front, just pinching those corners to make sure that everything is lined up correctly. And then I'll take that blue diagonal plaid and I'm going to glue that across the center of the card using my glue tube. And that provides just a nice subtle bit of contrast against that floral pattern that I think is really pretty. Then I'll bring in my focal panel and I'm going to glue that with my glue tube as well and make sure that it is centered on there. So I have about the same amount showing on all 4 sides. I'll press that down carefully just in case that sentiment isn't quite dry. And then I can bring in my images. I'll start with my tree branch and figure out where I'm going to need to trim that down. Then I'll grab my cutter bee Teflon coated scissors and just cut down the back of that, add some foam tape to the back and line that up right underneath the sentiment so that we can still see the word A and the leaves aren't covering that up. I did have just a little bit too much foam tape under that one leaf since it is going to extend out over the top of the frame on the left side. So I just tore that off so that it would fit and then added a touch of glue. Then I'm going to take that bird feeder. I'll add some foam tape to the back of that as well. So we have a nice bit of dimension in this little scene. And I will line that up in the center of the space below that branch. Then I'm going to take that extra pile of birdseed and glue that right above the lip at the bottom of that bird feeder. So some of that has kind of spilled out and is kind of gathered in that basin. And then to make that look a little bit more uniform, like it all fits together and the seed is inside the edge of that bird feeder, I'm going to go back to the same markers that I used to color that in and just go over that bottom white line to just make it look a little bit more like it's all one piece together. But I really like how that adds an extra layer of dimension in front of the other seed that is in the container. Then I'm going to add my standing bird so that it looks like he is eating some of that bird seed. So I'm going to perch him right on the edge of that bird feeder. I used a little bit of foam tape where it was needed and then liquid glue where it was going to overlap the bird feeder that is already popped up. Then I'll have another bird flying in from the right side. And my last little bird, I thought about having him just above the branch, but I decided to make it look like he has just landed. And so his feet are just tucked behind the edge of that branch. And then I'll add my flowers to that tree branch just to tie back into that pattern paper. The flowers also help to give it a little bit of a springtime feel, but I think you could color this set in so many different ways and have it be any season that you want. I absolutely adore this stamp set. I think it's so, so sweet. I'm a huge bird lover, and I just thought that this one was so cute and right up my alley. I had one flower left and I decided to put that at the edge of the bird feeder as if maybe the birds flying around have knocked that down and it kind of got caught on the edge there, just to pull some of that color down towards the bottom of the scene. Then I'm going to add some stardust stickles, filling in the centers of the flowers and also the larger seeds in the bird feed. And I also added a few little dots into the bird seed as well. And then I decided to add in a few little clear sequins. I just thought that would be a nice touch to fill in some of the empty space. So I'm using my embellishment wand and just adding a little dot of liquid glue and then setting those down in place. And then once I've let those dry for about a minute or two, I'll fill in the centers with some more stardust stickles so we have an extra bit of sparkle. And that is going to finish up my card for today. I'll lift that up so you can see it in a bit more detail and give you another peek at the inside. I had so much fun playing with this adorable stamp set today. I already can't wait until I can make another card with it. So if you enjoyed it too, please be sure to hit that like button and leave me a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you so much for spending your time with me today. I hope you had a good one, and I'll see you soon in another video. Bye-bye.